Welcome back, once again, dear viewers, to the realm of Final Fantasy XIV, where today we're tackling another of the 3 new dungeons added in the recent patch, this one being the Keeper of the Lake. So let's queue on up for duty roulette, and hope it drops us where we want to land. Now, Keeper of the Lake was introduced in the most recent patch, as I just mentioned, but it was introduced in the main scenario. So you do have to actually complete an amount of the story in order to unlock this one. It's not merely unlocked with a simple side quest as the other two are. With these queues as long as they are, these files would certainly be a lot smaller if I didn't want to keep in that tiny little bit of the Duty Finder window going, ping, you got a dungeon. The extent I go to. After the lengthy wait, though, we finally got our party! So let's see what this group has in store for us as we approach the Keeper of the Lake. Now, lore-wise, the Keeper of the Lake is named to, fair warning, there will be an amount of spoiler in this video. Considering this was unlocked in the main scenario, there's not really much I can do to not mention some things. But the Keeper of the Lake, lore-wise, is actually the name for the entire structure that's in the middle of the lake. That is the flagship of the Garlean Empire's initial assault, which was then brought down by Midgardsormr. This dungeon has us going into that downed flagship and encountering Midgardsormr being wrapped around it. Of course, we had to approach by sea, which means we can't just walk right in. We've got to actually go across the shore to get to it the first time. And so in our brief stretch running across the land in order to get to it, we'll encounter a couple enemies. The first of which is a group of crabs. These, as far as I can tell, are simply the exact same enemies that we saw in Sestasha hard mode, complete with 1 red, 2 green. I'm not sure if they've had their stats increased to accommodate the higher item level requirement. But then right around the corner, we will of course find some Coblins and some Pugils. They'll do the same thing they've always done, with the Coblins having a circular AoE and the Pugils hating everything that ever lived. But you've killed plenty of these before, so there is no need to go into details. Now do be careful of the sea serpent type dude that's running about in the background, as he may wander over and tick you off. These are the same enemies. You fought these before. I think the first time I immediately recall encountering them was in Circus Tower. However, I am probably incorrect in that. However, they are the same mob type, which means they're going to be doing the same thing they did before, a lot of AoE, so do be careful. And then rounding it all up at the end is another couple Pugils and another Nanka. This Nanka, unlike the one that you encountered in Hullbreaker Island, does not have little babies attached to it. So you don't have to worry about stunning Hatch. Just wail on them all as always. And while the rest of the party runs ahead, there is a treasure coffer hidden off to the side. Not much of value is going to be in this one, usually just an X potion or something of the sort. And only a few enemies remain. The first section is actually a somewhat short one. But we encounter another couple Coblins, which we've seen before, and a Nyx. The Nyx, of course, being a large frog, has a couple AoEs, predominantly the large circular AoE around him that can, of course, be stunned. But that said, all of this is things you've seen before and enemy types you've seen before. And then after that brief stint of enemies, what was that, just 4 small groups of enemies? We encounter the first boss. Now the first boss may give you a little bit of trouble at first, but honestly, there's not a lot going on here. This thing does not like the tank. He'll beat on him, breathe fire on him. In fact, the fact that this boss will breathe fire is probably one of the most dangerous things it can do, and not necessarily because of its initial damage. You see a couple other birds floating up in the air there, who will drop canisters down on the ground. These canisters, I don't believe, can actually be destroyed. However, if you hit them, you'll knock them away. And you really want to knock them away, as the boss's fire breath will explode them. When the boss disappears and reappears, it usually comes back with an additional weapon or two. This time it came back with a steel pipe, of all things. Disappearing, reappearing again, now it's packed with a minigun, and has gained a conal AoE there. As before, you just want to make sure all of the canisters that were dropped in the arena are knocked away from the boss, so they're not lit off by accident, and just continue beating on that boss. Gains a couple attacks. Predominantly, we saw the conal AoE and a directional AoE there. Also of note is that now the boss will start using an attack that sucks all the canisters in, immediately followed by breathing fire. Just be ready with some kind of AoE to knock them back. On Monk, I've got Arm of the Destroyer, so it's super easy for me to hit that and knock them all away real quick. Predominantly, all you're doing in this fight is keeping the canisters away from the boss, and they will do everything they can to make sure the canisters are right there next to the boss. Boss disappears, reappears again, and once again has a different weapon, another minigun of some form, and this time he gains a... what would you even call those? A placed AoE? An aimed AoE? With an aimed AoE. Still retains a conal, but you just keep beating on him as you have been, keep the canisters away. There's not a lot more to it than that. Dropping the aimed AoE down a few times, and he'll potentially try to suck in all of the things again, but honestly, he's close enough to the end of the fight, we should be able to pull him off. Kill him off, whatever, pull it off. I can word sometimes. Much like the other dungeon that we've seen, 2 items will drop from beating this, a piece of item level 100 gear and a crafting item. So with them, lot on them and we can move on. Now that we're actually inside the wreckage of the ship proper, we'll start encountering Garlean soldiers. These, of course, include regular human soldiers, as well as the large vanguard. All of these are enemies you had to fight many times, even going through the initial main scenario. So there shouldn't really be a lot here you haven't seen. Their stats, of course, have been upped to fit the item level requirement of this dungeon, but mechanically, it's nothing you haven't seen before. With the first small group down, we have to run up and deactivate the switch so we can go in at all. But we've got an alarm sounding now because they know somebody's there, and I haven't heard that sound since last time I did main scenario roulette, which wasn't that long ago. You'll encounter another small group of enemies. These enemies, as usual, aren't that much of a threat. However, you'll also notice the large iron giant kind of dude over there, who is constantly hitting you with a directional AoE. There is a small Magitek device in front of you that if you destroy, the barrier between us and the golem will go down, and the iron golem will come out. Iron giant will come out and attack you. Some people like to destroy the barrier first, so the Iron Giant is out there with everybody else. I would advise against that if you don't intend to just AoE everything down immediately. Because this thing's attacks in close range are a lot more trouble than simply moving to the side to dodge a directional AoE. Especially when he's got a directional AoE like that. So unless you intend to blitz down the Magitek device first and then AoE everything, I would suggest simply beating on everything first, then freeing him, then beating him down. In fact, if you're going to solo DPS the one thing, the Magitek device down anyway, when you have that kind of AoE, I would still request or suggest just killing all of the dudes outside, then freeing the Iron Giant. Magitek Colossus? I don't know, they've got a lot of different names. The second room here is identical to the first, however, this time one of the various people here I'm willing to bet it's the other DPS decided it was a good idea to try to destroy the Magitek device, bringing the Iron Giant out for us to fight at the same time as we fight everything else. You do actually have to kill all of the Magitek Colossus in order to get the key that opens up the door to the next area. The next area, I do believe, is our next boss. Is it? Maybe it's not. It is! So that brings us to the second boss of this dungeon. Now, this boss, I guess you could say this boss is a little bit of trouble, if only because of the amount of damage that it's outputting. It also very much likes fire. A lot of things in this dungeon like fire. A wide conal AoE to start with. Of course, you can simply sidestep that. One of the main things this boss will be doing is laying down these fire circles. You'll notice a mark appear over someone's head. This mark means he's targeting that person with the fire circles, and he will aim towards them and move across the arena going towards them. He will not, however, go too close to the edge of the arena, but your goal, if you get that mark over your head, should be to move as close to the edge of the arena, leaving as much of the arena open as possible. Like, you move to the edge of the arena so that the line between you and him cuts off the smallest section of the arena as possible. A couple ads spawn partway through, but they go down fairly quickly. Mostly a nuisance and something to distract you while other things are going on. But once they're down, you can get back to work on the boss itself, who, once again, I haven't seen do anything especially dangerous. That we haven't seen. You can see I have the mark on me, so I'm moving off to one side to get him to aim as far to that side as possible. So now with the fire all on that stretch of the arena, we have a huge amount of the arena at our disposal to move around. But that aside, he's just got his regular attacks, the wide conal AoE before, the aimed AoE. Couple more ads spawn, this time only the one Magitek Vanguard to be defeated. But for the most part, you've seen the fight. A lot of it is dealing with multiple mechanics while dealing with the ads at the same time. And you can see I did not move fast enough there, and now almost the entire arena is blocked off, which is going to be giving us a fair amount of trouble. On top of everything else, you also saw it just randomly drop one of those flame circles on top of where I was standing. That wasn't even a charge across the room. There's a lot of AoEs to be careful of, but predominantly that's it. Watch the floor, don't stand in crap. There's enough going on that it may get difficult to dodge things, and it may get very restrictive as far as you can move. And as our other DPS there learned, you can die simply by not being in a great position. But if he'd come out of the fire for half a second, we could hit him and finish this whole fight off. And you saw there, despite that I was closer to the wall than I was as close to the wall as I could potentially be, he didn't actually aim directly across at me, if only because he wouldn't. He actually pointed himself a little bit more into the room so he could get his full stretch in. But for beating the second boss, we're now given 4 items out of the chest. That's 2 pieces of item level 100 equipment and 2 crafting items. And sadly our other DPS died again, probably because he was in a weakened state. A lot of zone lines in this area. The place doesn't seem that big. Maybe it's because we've got such, like, big views inside or outside of the airship. Once everybody catches up, we can move into the third stretch, the third leg of the dungeon, though. We're back on the outside now. We've worked our way through the Garlean base, or not base, the Garlean camp, and we are now working our way towards the very top, where Midgardsormr's head is. Being this high up, of course, you're going to run into a couple of birds, a dragonfly, and 2 falcons. These enemies, as usual, are enemy types we've seen before, and they don't especially do anything abnormal, so wear them down as you would. And of course, considering the King of Dragons, was that his title, something like that, is about, there are going to be dragons as well, but it's still just 2 falcons and a Beast, who we've all seen before. Now, do note that the entire time you're running around out here, you will see the aimed AoEs dropping down randomly, and that's because another airship identical to the one we fought as the second boss is flying around the outside of this thing shooting at you. Though interesting, I feel like that would have suited better for taking place in the second part, so it's like taunting you through the part of the dungeon, and then you fight it in the end. Granted, how it would shoot you while you're inside the airship is beyond me. I don't know, this is a neat dungeon, but there's a lot about it I'm not as impressed with. But regardless, we're now introduced to another new enemy, a wyvern, which of course we've defeated now. I still don't think any of them have done anything abnormal, anything out of the norm, so generally I just go for the largest enemy first as my kill priority. So I'd kill the wyvern, then the Beast, and then the other guys. I'm not pronouncing that right, I know I'm not. Once they're all defeated, the airship that's attacking you will actually bomb that wall letting you in. And then once you're in, it'll just kind of fly off and leave you alone. Now, running ahead here, I did remember to turn the setting back on. Running back in here, you'll find 2 dragons laying there on the floor, as well as the spirit of Midgardsormr. This guy ain't fudging around, and he is large. You're only going to be dealing with his head in this fight, and even then I feel like his head is downsized a little. This fight has two real phases that it kind of alternates between. There's a short phase here where you're fighting against Midgardsormr himself, and you'll notice his has a couple AoEs, such as a large AoE around him, as well as a directional AoE that stripes the arena. And then a large one. Partway through the fight, a short distance into the fight, one of the large dragons will spawn. Your goal is to kill that dragon. Midgardsormr is pouring his life essence into it to keep it alive. So this, of course, is kind of bad because he's bringing a wyvern about, or dragon about. But on the upside, defeating this dragon will also seriously wound Midgardsormr. A huge amount of this fight is simply dodging AoEs, because not only is this dragon using any number of AoEs and directional attacks, but so is Midgardsormr. He's still attacking you throughout this entire dungeon, or throughout this entire fight. And you even see the first boss rear its ugly head again. This time it's actually holding one of the canisters. As soon as it spawns, your goal is to kill it. It'll drop the tank on the ground, which creates a barrier around it. You need to be within this barrier before Midgardsormr's large attack goes off, or you will die. With it done, you get to turn your attention back to the dragon. It should be almost dead at this point, so quickly finish it off. Of course, remembering to dodge all of Midgardsormr's AoEs. You have the large inner AoE there, as long as another one you saw before that was outer. With it dead, you have a very brief moment where you can go back and continue to punch Midgardsormr himself. Killing the dragon did a substantial amount of damage to Midgardsormr. You'll also notice a barrier goes up around Midgardsormr. When he summons the dragon, or when he revives the dragon, you simply cannot harm Midgardsormr. And a couple new attacks introduced in this phase is that slowly extending fire AoE. The circular one that goes out in phases. The phases do give you a chance to get a little further away from it, though, so it takes up more space, but you've got more time to get out of the way. But your goal is still to kill the second dragon. Midgardsormr adds a couple AoEs to his repertoire, as well as having to deal with this new dragon, and I think he's got a couple attacks the other dragon didn't have as well. Really, the whole fight is just amping up and amping up. You've got more and more and more to deal with and dodge and get out of the way of. By this point, the fight can get somewhat chaotic, though your goal is still the same it always was. You cannot harm Midgardsormr, so kill the dragon. When the dragon is dead, you should be able to get back to work on Midgardsormr. Weave between all the AoEs, and much like previously, eventually you will see a version of the first boss come fluttering about that you've got to deal with. A large multi-stage AoE to get out of the way of. The boss plopped down an ice aimed AoE at one point. And we see them continuing to go down. Now Midgardsormr is once again channeling his large attack. That's where you need the flying add dead so you can get in the barrier. Be careful not to get killed by everything else going on while you're in that barrier, though. With that done, the dragon should be left alive. He shouldn't have a lot left in him, though. I've heard multiple ideas, multiple strategies as to what to do from here. You can limit break this dragon, which I believe I was told to do, so I'm doing. Which should all but kill that dragon and leave Midgardsormr with just a sliver of life. I've also seen Midgardsormr, the limit break saved, and Midgardsormr himself limit break at the end. Personally, I think the second dragon is probably the better location to do it. But with that done, you've defeated the spirit of Midgardsormr, and he's gonna go back to taking a nap for a little while. You're rewarded with an item level 100 piece of equipment, as well as a crafting item, much as you have before, and that's not mentioning the various tomes that you have. But thus ends the Keeper of the Lake. Until next time, everyone, we've still got one dungeon to go.